Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. This week my supporters on Patreon voted for Quintorius History Chaser as our commander in this red-white self-mill and discard deck. Our commander, a 4-mana Planeswalker that starts out at 5 loyalty with a very interesting passive ability where whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, we get to create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So ideally we want to fill our graveyards, and the +1 ability helps with that, as we can discard a card if we do draw 2 and then mill a card. But then from there we need to do the hard work ourselves of removing cards out of our graveyard, and we can do that in a variety of ways. We have a lot of artifacts in this deck that can tap to maybe exile a card from a graveyard, so we can exile cards from our own graveyard to then generate a spirit token each time. And we also have a few other effects that can return cards out of our graveyard in general. So those are all ways of triggering Quintorius to assemble an army of spirit tokens, at which point we can use the -4 to give our spirits double strike and vigilance until end of turn, so that can very quickly help close out the game. So that's our plan in a nutshell. If we take a look at our deck breakdown, I'll split things up into a few different categories, starting with those aforementioned ways to exile cards out of our own graveyard. So those will often be cheap artifacts. Then we've got additional discard and recursion synergies, so additional ways to fill our graveyard and get stuff back to also trigger Quintorius in the process. Then we've got a small ramp section, mostly 2-mana ramp artifacts, so we can try to cast Quintorius on turn 3 already. And then we also need some removal to protect our Planeswalker and interact with the opponent's game plan, so lots of instant speed removal as well as some sorcery speed sweepers to keep the board clear, and then some answers to artifacts and enchantments. And then we've got some additional spirits to synergize with Quintorius's -4 ability. We don't need to go overboard with a lot of spirit creatures, since we can very quickly make a lot of spirit tokens, which is a more efficient way of setting up the -4 ability. And then our miscellaneous section has a few more token synergies, ways to draw cards when tokens enter, maybe ways to double our tokens as well. And then I'm also trying out the 2 new paradigm cards, which can also be very powerful if we can ramp into them ahead of schedule. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with those exile effects. At 1 mana, there's a Bag of Holding, saying whenever we discard a card, exile that card from our graveyard. So now if we use Quintorius's +1 ability, where we discard, draw, and mill, now we get to exile that card instead, which in turn also generates a spirit token. So every time we discard, we now get a spirit in addition to exiling the card with a bag, and later we could potentially get it back. Then the currency converter is very similar. If we discard, exile that card instead, and can still turn that into treasure tokens or rogue tokens. Then a Ghost Vacuum, Relic of Progenitus, and Scrabbling Claws, all 1-mana ways to exile cards from our own graveyard. We get to decide what we exile, so we're often just going to get rid of instants and sorceries, which we're not going to get back, unlike some of our other permanents. And then the Conspiracy Theorist as well as Containment Construct are similar to the Bag of Holding and Currency Converter, in that if we now discard a card, it gets exiled instead, and we can cast that card this turn as well, so that can also provide additional value in addition to making more spirit tokens. And then we also have Agatha's Soul Cauldron, the Ooze, and Unlicensed Hearse as additional 2-mana graveyard hate that can also target our own graveyard to make more spirits. And Quintorius, the Lore Master, says at the beginning of your end step, exile target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard and create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So now we get to double up on spirits with Quintorius History Chaser on the battlefield. Then we get to our discard section, where Faithless Looting is an easy way to draw 2 and discard 2, also has Flashback, and any Flashback card is another way of triggering Quintorius to make an extra spirit, as it's a card that also leaves our graveyard. So similar to Looting is Pursue the Past, which also has Flashback, can gain 2, discard, and draw 2. And then we're also trying out the Hardened Academic, which is a 2/1 with Flying and Haste, can discard a card at any point to give it a lifelink until end of turn, and whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, we can put a +1 counter on target creature we control. So this also has a great synergy with the previous section, where we can now generate a lot of extra +1/+1 counters. Quint's Insight is pretty fitting, as it has been rebranded from the Spider-Man art, and now lets us discard and draw each turn. Whenever we play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, so that can also occasionally trigger. Savine's Reclamation is a way to return permanents from our graveyard that have mana value 3 or less, can even get back fetch lands, which is a way of ramping, and with Flashback we get to return 2 things instead. Monument to Endurance, another way to synergize with the discard ability from Quintorius, as we now get to either draw, make a treasure, or make the opponent lose 3 life. Serra Paragon, once each turn, lets us play a land or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard, in turn triggering Quintorius. The Arc of Hunger is also very synergistic, as we can tap it to mill a card, and we can play that card this turn. Whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we gain 1 life, so that can also trigger quite a few times. Excava is kind of the alternate commander for this deck in paper, and the only other card we got out of the commander deck, a 4-mana 3/3 with Flying and Haste, and when it attacks we get to return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or non-aura enchantment with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, has a finality counter, and turns into a 1/1 spirit creature with flying in addition to its other types. So more graveyard recursion, as well as more spirits to synergize with Quintorius's -4. Primary Research at 5 mana can also return a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less, and then at the beginning of our end step, if a card left our graveyard this turn, we draw a card, so that can also consistently trigger each turn in this deck. And then Quintorius Field Historian, as kind of the uncommon Quintorius, can also generate additional 3/2 spirits whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, so we can once again double dip with our commander, and spirits also get 1 additional power, so while it's not incredibly powerful, still felt fitting to include it here. And then Sun Titan can also return stuff with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard when it enters or attacks, and can also get back lands with it. Then our ramp section's pretty simple, all the 2 mana artifacts that can generate extra mana to help us cast Quintorius on turn 3, not playing any of the creature ramp cards. And then we've got Tablet of Discovery, which can make 2 mana to cast instants and sorceries, and when it enters can also mill a card that we get to play this turn, so that's potentially more value. Patchwork Banner, naming Spirit to pump them up, and Worn Powerstone gets to make 2 mana once we get to untap with it. Then in our removal section, I'm trying out Erode as a cheap answer to creatures and planeswalkers. It will give the opponent a basic land back, so it's not the best answer to opposing commanders, since they can usually recast them on the following turn, but it can still be a nice tempo play or a way to protect our commander. Then Swords to Plowshares doesn't need an introduction, same with Lightning Bolt. Get Lost, another answer to creatures and planeswalkers, can also hit enchantments. Abrade can also hit artifacts. And Rip Apart is also very flexible at sorcery speed. Lightning Helix can deal 3 and gain 3. And then we've got Loran, which can blow up artifacts and enchantments when she enters. And then a whole bunch of sweepers here with Split Up, Day of Judgment, Depopulate, which will also draw a card if we control a multicolored spirit, and a Wrath of God. And then Elspeth Conquers Death can also be a versatile answer that can eventually get something back out of our graveyard, maybe even our commander if we decided to leave it in the graveyard after it gets removed. And then we get to our spirits, where we've got Selfless Spirit as a way to make our creatures indestructible, maybe before we're gonna cast our own board wipe. We've got Staff of the Storyteller, making a spirit token, and then can accumulate extra counters which can turn into additional card advantage. Skyclave Apparition, another versatile answer that also happens to be a spirit. Blade Reforged can provide extra value when it attacks. Screaming Nemesis is just a powerful card and can also potentially play defense for us quite well. And then Ugin the Ineffable also makes spirit tokens with a +1 ability to synergize with Quintorius, and also discounts our colorless spells by 2, and there's quite a few throughout. And then our miscellaneous section has Enlightened Tutor to search up some of those enablers in the previous sections. We've got both Caretaker's Talent and Tokasia's Welcome to draw when our tokens enter. And then Elspeth Stormslayer can double our tokens in addition to maybe giving them flying. And then we've got the 2 Paradigm cards, a Restoration Seminar returning a non-land permanent from our graveyard each turn, whereas the Improvisation Capstone also has been very impressive, helping us cast a bunch of free spells each turn, and if we get lucky, the mana values can accrue very quickly. And then the mana base has a few utility lands, Air Temple for +1 counters, Iganjo and the Crucible for additional interaction. The Crucible making spirit tokens is also quite synergistic here, and by discarding these channel lands we can also maybe trigger some of our other synergies. And then plenty of red-white mana fixing, Buried Ruin to maybe return some of our artifacts, and plenty of fetch lands, since by sacrificing a fetch land we also end up with more cards in the graveyard that we can potentially work with. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play. We have a slow hand with a bunch of sweepers against the Reanimator deck. So I mean, this is definitely a matchup where we just mulligan to find our graveyard hates, since we have so many. And Enlightened Tutor, I guess, can get one. So yeah, this is fine. Turn 1 I get to Enlightened Tutor. And then turn 2 Mind Stone, and then play whatever 1 mana artifact we got. So then we can keep our opponent's graveyard clean and take it from there. Inquisition, okay. Got a tutor in response, and then they might go for Mind Stone. So then I could also get a 2 mana graveyard hate card like Cauldron or the Ooze. There's a Hearse. I mean, Ghost Vacuum is probably the most useful answer if they don't take the Mind Stone especially. But yeah, what would our opponent take here? I imagine it's the Mind Stone. So then maybe I prefer Cauldron or Hearse. I'll get the Hearse. And our opponent did indeed take the Mind Stone. So cast a Hearse while I can. And then no reanimating for the opponent at least. Now I do still need to hit some more land drops. Reclamation can also get back a fetch lanes. Might be better than Mind Stone here. That works, so now we can get a Surveil land. Yeah, facing a Reanimator deck with our 8+ main deck graveyard hate cards is pretty funny. Of course, our opponent can still hardcast their spells, and they actually had a Stifle for my fetch land. Alright, could have also stifled the Hearse, but I guess that was unlikely to make a huge difference. So the game goes on. Play the talents. So I guess in hindsight, getting the Mind Stone would have worked out better. They can still cast Kavaero just as a 4/4, but opponent does not. And that one's gonna have to wait for a while. So yeah, can't do anything sadly. Between the Stifle and the Inquisition, we were denied some mana. And the rest resolves. Takes our 7-drop after all. And Undercity Sewers. Okay, so opponent's pretty far ahead of mana, so yeah, they could start hardcasting some of their bombs. And 3 damage may not be enough to answer them. Yeah, that's another uncastable spell. And Dreams of Steel and Oil resolves. And gets rid of my Mind Stone, which I could have maybe Reclamation back later. And now Aetherflux Reservoir, we can Abrade. It's not a super scary card, to be fair, but it is a way to spend my mana. Yeah, this kind of feels like bait to me. Alright, there we go, Signets. And then I could still Abrade or Helix if needed. Opponent does nothing. Alright, I guess we'll try our commander now. That resolves. Discard Helix. If our opponent removes Quintorius, it's going to be interesting whether I want to make a Spirit token in response or keep the Hearse available. Because of course we do risk our opponent then discarding a bomb and reanimating it back. So milled a land. Took Asia's Welcome, can draw more with the Caretaker's Talent. but gonna keep the hearse available in case they can discard at instant speed. Alright, Vampiric Tutor can get whatever they want. Maybe they've got something like a Tidebinder to shut down the hearse. Or they're just gonna hardcast some 5 or 6 drop. Alright, opponent passes. So now I will exile a card from my own graveyard to make a spirit and draw a card. And one's enough. So we're finally getting our engine going. Sarah Paragon can also get stuff back. So, options aplenty. Tapping out for Elspeth, also reasonable. Possible they'll have a counterspell like Mana Drain at the ready. But I think it's worth a shot. So we'll see if this resolves. It does. So I'll immediately make some tokens. And then Quintorius can keep on discarding and milling. A Rip Apart a little bit more flexible than a Braid. Right, and then Relic is more graveyard hate that we can try to deploy next turn. Start attacking. We have to be careful that we don't end up with too many creatures in our own graveyard, since Kavaero can also turn into one of those. Possible they have something like a River's Rebuke. Alright, Strategic Betrayal can exile my graveyard. I guess that will trigger Quintorius for me. And then now I could hearse myself, since I doubt our opponent will have a discard outlet plus Kavaero this turn. So then I get to trigger Quintorius twice. So, yeah, it doesn't matter here since everything's gonna be gone. So we get a Spirit, ×2 because of Elspeth. Cauldron, more graveyard hate. And then exile a token, which once again makes 2 tokens with Quintorius and Elspeth. And go for the throat, 3-2. We might even have lethal here between Quintorius, Elspeth, and the hearse. So, yeah, options aplenty. I guess we do not have any cards left in graveyard for Relic or Cauldron to make more spirits at the moment. But how about we just play Screaming Nemesis, and then give spirits double strike. Probably a bit risky to animate the hearse. So sure, we'll just go for +1 counters. And then double strike. And that should be more than enough. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Quandrix. So, the Cascade deck. Having a sweeper's nice, even though this will draw them a card, most likely. Still think we should look for some mana acceleration. Borrow Signets works. So we'll start with a Surveil. And then finding a sweeper eventually would be useful. Turn 1 Lanner Elves. Yeah, facing green ramp strategies is always tough, since they can eventually go over the top. Sun Titan could be something worth ramping into, I suppose. Sure, we'll keep it on top. Still missing a way to exile stuff from my graveyard to enable Quintorius right away. But it's probably worth it to try and cast here. And And then discarding the Selfless Spirit means I can maybe get it back with Excava next turn. Get Lost can deal with something large, as our opponent plays the Extrapolator.
Get away from here.
Okay, so a bit of +1 counter synergy. So, what are we thinking? Still plus Quintorius, see what we mill. Discarding Battlefield Forge. Found a hearse, so that can help make some spirit tokens. Although this turn Excava still seems a bit more promising. And then I could get back either Talent or Power Stone as well. Power Stone sets up Sun Titan next turn, so maybe start there. It is weird seeing Power Stone as a creature. Opponent goes for Quandrix. And gets a mana of Umberta. And hits an Elvish Mystic. River's Rebuke would have been painful, but can't cascade into a 6-drop with a 6-drop. And Quintorius can take 2. Alrighty, so we have options. Probably start by plussing Quintorius. And discard. Just a land is fine. Alright, now the Capstone is definitely worth casting as well. Although I'm kind of liking Sun Titan plus Get Lost. Can Sun Titan and get back the talent. And then Get Lost Quandrix, even though they can pretty easily recast it. But that opens up an attack. And then Excava, get back Selfless Spirit to protect my team, make another Spirit token. Already good to draw off the Caretaker's talent. So yeah, we're doing it. Next turn, we could go for the Capstone, maybe Endurance plus Conquer's Death. As Quandrix hits an Ornithopter. And a Halfling. Could also give our Spirits double strike here, if we just want to get the game over with. Yeah, we should be close to lethal damage, or at least force them to chump a whole bunch. So I can go Monument. And then activate Quintorius. I guess if we're going for a double strike, I wouldn't be enabling it here. But maybe that's fine. Just go for Conquer's Death. Hit Quandrix. And then if I go for double strike, we are threatening a lot of damage.
My newest hypothesis.
Could also copy a token here if I'd like. They don't have haste. And attack. And then get back a land. Nothing to get back with Excava. So this still has our opponent taking 14 exactly. Alright, sweet. Probably shouldn't have played the Monument here, but I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Eshki, Temur, Stompy. Well, having a pair of sweepers is quite useful, so definitely gonna keep. Turn to Ironcrag into a sweeper, or we can start with Quintorius. Still need a way to reliably enable Quintorius to make spirit tokens, but I'm sure we'll find it eventually. And then with Elspeth Conqueror's death, we maybe have a way to return our Planeswalker without having to cast it again. Turn 1 Kami. Would have preferred to see an actual mana elf. So, play Ironcrag, pass a turn. Ideally we can first play Quintorius, let him overextend, and then play our sweeper. And I think we can. And now Ghost Vacuum will be a way to enable it. At 6 loyalty, there's a good chance we'll get to untap with it. So what to discard? It might be the land, hoping to draw more. Okay. 2 lands in graveyard. Arcane Signet. And Battler, okay. That does trigger Eshki here, since it's 6 power on the stack. But now we can wipe the board and then still play Ghost Vacuum. And discard the Insight, can maybe get it back with Excava later. And then we can make a Spirit at instant speed. Eshki is back. And the Trudge, another 6 powered creature, yeah. Eshki's picked up some nice tools recently. So we fall to 18. It's possible I'll want to wipe the board already. Ideally we can wait a bit longer. Alright, so now with Construct and Theorist we have more ways to exile cards from our graveyard. And in turn make more Spirit tokens. Could Conqueror's Death Eshki, if we're afraid of it, and I kind of am. So, can do that. Still use Quintorius. Maybe ditch the Theorist.
What kind of mystery are you?
And then now we can go Signet into Elspeth Conqueror's Death. And then, do I keep an extra token back? I think I'm fine to attack. If they do take out Quintorius, I could leave it in the graveyard to get back on chapter 3. Alright, Eshki's back for a 3rd time. And then a land can go. Tanks the opponent's non-creature spells. And then I could Excava, get back maybe a Theorist or an Insight. Could also start with Construct and then use Quintorius. Discarding Excava so I can cast it. And that will also make another Spirit. So then I can go Mind Stone into Excava. Could consider transforming Ironcrag, but we'll have ways to spend our mana. And then go to attackers. And get back. Let's go for the Insights. And then next turn going for a double strike could present lethal. With the Vacuum we can make another token at instant speed. Ooh, Etali. That could be scary. Another way to trigger Eshki. And what do they get? Just a Mystic and a Power Stone. Alright, we should be fine. And then next turn with Double Strike especially, we can easily cross the finish line. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Raph and Mikey, Troublemakers. So this is a matchup where we need instant speed removal ideally. Erode is a little awkward since it does help them recast their commander pretty easily on the following turn. Between Bag of Holding and Hearse, I can make quite a few tokens with Quintorius, although I am missing the ramp to go with it. So this one's borderline. On the play, we can maybe work with this. Although, I also don't have any fetch lands to really fill the graveyard right away. Still, we can rely on the cards we mill from Quintorius to fill the graveyard. And then if we discard, we exile that card instead, which immediately triggers Quintorius as well. Can also draw this card. Especially if we're maybe not gonna hit our land drops. Alright, the staff can also help us draw more cards. So maybe prefer that over the unlicensed Hearse. Although next turn I can go staff and potentially draw. Although I think staff first still makes sense, because that way if I draw next turn and don't hit a land, I can still use Bag of Holding to try and get to 4 mana for Quintorius. So expecting some sorcery or artifact for the opponent to a ramp. Analyze just gets a basic, so that doesn't get them ahead of mana. And the Academic. So I should start by drawing with the staff. And did not find the land, so now I'll prioritize Bag of Holding. Alright, Banditry can deal with my spirits and give them a treasure. That's fine. Still no land. Probably ditching either Hearse or the Ooze. Let's go with the Hearse. And still no land, that's awkward. So can't play Quintorius. How do we want to proceed? I guess it's just draw with Bag again. Alright, we got there. And then... do I see myself using the Academic? Converter's also a little bit redundant with a Bag of Holding, so maybe that goes. And then I can play a Construct, although that's also redundant with a Bag, so I think I prefer the Ooze. Okay, and then next turn I'll finally be able to play Quintorius. And our opponent will have potentially 7 mana for Raph and Mikey. So I kinda need to keep up Erode, which only works if we draw land. May as well exile their stuff. Alright, that's not a land. I think I still Quintorius and then just hope to draw one. Otherwise I'm just going to be too far behind. I mean, what are the alternatives here? I can pursue the past. Or just play Academic, but that feels pretty weak. And then I need a white source specifically.
Together we can dig even faster. Must dig deeper.
Alright, we got there. So then I can either erode or draw a card with a staff. so it's pretty well disguised. The Ooze can make another Spirit by exiling the Transformer. Alright, opponents maybe not going for Raph and Mikey yet. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I guess they can still cast it now. Okay, so before they get a chance to attack, we'll have to erode it. But that does mean that next turn they can easily just cast it again. So we only bought ourselves a little bit of time. Can get rid of the erode now. Okay, so next up, activate Quintorius. I don't think we're getting there with the double strike right now. And then what to discard? Could discard the Academic. We'll get exiled by the bag, so it's not like I can Sun Titan it back. So maybe it's just a land. A Rip Apart could hit the Signet. Does that slow them down enough? They would still have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 with a land 9. So I don't think Rip Apart is necessarily the play. Going for Sun Titan, get back Transformer does put some bodies on the battlefield. Or I can keep digging in the hopes of finding some more instant speed removal. At least we get to make some tokens in the process. Can still draw with the staff. Alright, doesn't look like we'll get there. Now with the Academic, I can still discard my hand, and for each card I discard, we get a Spirit token. So that's still powerful. And then I guess we also get a +1 counter. So I was actually closer to lethal than I thought. Alright, I guess we'll give this a counter. Discard. Trigger Quintorius. Give this more counters. I think I'm just going for it here. As much lifelink as possible. So even if they smack me with Raph and Mikey, we might be okay. See, had I gone for double strike, this would have been a lot of damage. Alright, and then the Ooze can make one more Spirit. I guess we'll do it now for the extra counter. Opponent falls to 8. We're at 36. Yeah, Bag of Holding plus Academic is pretty sweet. Although you can replace Bag of Holding with any number of effects. Opponent actually had another sweeper here, Fire Magic. Although there's a very large Academic that they still need to deal with. Which they don't seem to be able to. Alright, GG's. Looks like the Academic is going to go the distance. Could also give it double strike now. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Vivi, blue-red spells. Well, Lightning Bolt could be an answer to Vivi, but opponent could also grow it in response at instant speed, so we have to be very careful. That being said, I think my hand's keepable. We can start with a Scrabbling Claws, turn 2 Signet, turn 3 Quintorius, and then with the Claws we can immediately make a token. Okay. Yeah, If our opponent does keep up a counter spell, we can maybe go Ooze plus end of turn Surveil with our fetch. And our opponent does indeed pass with 2 mana up. So I guess we'll make the opponent exile something. Unlikely to be super relevant outside of maybe Delve spells. Alright, I guess now with a tablet gives us another decent play. So go ahead and fetch a mountain. And then I can go tablet plus Ooze. And get to mill a card. I could cast the Academic. I guess that's good value. Now if they have a free spell, they can potentially grow Vivi right away before I get a chance to bolt it. So there is definitely a risk to tapping out. Opponent takes out the Academic, that's fine. Okay, so we'll pass a turn. And the opponent's not tapping out for Vivi. They do have 2 mana up once again, so a counter spell seems likely. Although we're getting to the point where we can cast a 6 mana Quintorius as well. Day of Judgment gives me some insurance. Alright, Quintorius resolves, excellent. So in that case, could discard the Ooze. Or we can ditch the Bolt. I think I still will hang on to the Bolt. So ditch the Ooze.
Must dig deeper.
Mill on Elspeth Conquers Death. Abandon attachments is fine. So the graveyard's getting pretty full. Talisman. Opponent's still waiting on Vivi. And a Mystic Remora. Whenever your opponent casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. Does have cumulative upkeep. Fair enough. So that happens. And then I get to clause myself. And get rid of fetch land is fine. Go ahead and Surveil. And the Capstone would be nice to resolve. Take my turn. Quintorius will discard and draw.
What kind of mystery are you?
Alright, Excava at least doesn't trigger the Remora. Can get back an Ooze. So we can give that a shot. The Ooze does have Summoning Sickness now that it's a creature. Opponent's gonna pay the Remora cumulative upkeep and they're just gonna let it go. Alright, that worked out. Is it time for Vivi? It is. But they do have 3 mana left, so not sure if Lightning Bolt's necessarily gonna cut it. Alright, let's try this in response. I'm sure they'll have another instant. Magic Damper for Hexproof. Okay, I mean, they do now need to tap to make mana, so we have a turn where we can do whatever we want, which includes making more tokens. And potentially giving those spirits double strike now. So would that present a lethal? Opponent can block one creature, 9, 10, times 2 is 20, so yeah, this should just be game over. Because these are all spirits.
Soon you're the one who will be history.
Get back the academic. But yeah, would have been nice to cast a capstone here and see that in action. But there we have it. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Silverquill, black-white. My hand could use a third land. If we find it, then Power Stone unlocks pretty much everything else. Yeah, I'll try it. And then we would also like ways to enable Quintorius. Turn 1 Skrelv means I pretty much need to Swords it, although I can maybe wait to use the Skyclave Apparition on Skrelv, and then I'll still be able to Swords Silverquill. Alright, found the land, luckily. So we can try Power Stone. And then next turn, Quintorius is an option, either one of them. Although Field Historian's going to be better once we have a full graveyard. Announcement, also good target for the Apparition. So what are we thinking? Could also play a fetch and then Sun Titan to get it back. Our opponent's somewhat likely to have removal for this. But it does get me ahead of mana, which is kind of all I need right now. And then we could still Swords if we really wanted to. Our opponent did indeed have the removal spell. But this also could have answered Quintorius. And now Announcement is going to draw them a card. And drawing Ganjo. So this turn I could Quintorius, Apparition, and still Swords. Could also go for the Capstone and just get that going as soon as possible, which I also kind of like. Since our opponent doesn't have a super scary board, so if we just get to Capstone each turn, we should be pretty far ahead. And then rip apart, hit your enchantment, and still get a Screaming Nemesis. Yeah, this is awesome. How can we possibly lose? Fatal Push is enabled. But yeah, this is going to happen each turn. We've got double the opponent's mana. They tap out for Silverquill. I can Skyclave Skrelv and then still Sword Silverquill if they go and protect it. So Capstone triggers. And how about a Wrath of God? Yeah, this is silly. And now we've got several ways of generating spirit tokens with Quintorius. And yeah, understandably, our opponent has seen enough. Yeah, the capstones, especially if you can ramp into them, are pretty ridiculous in Brawl. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Dawn and Leo, blue-white flicker. So opponent can generate a lot of value with their commander once they get it going. This hand isn't bad, although I am missing a way to consistently enable Quintorius. Got some nice ramp. Loran is likely to find targets. And then Swords as creature interaction. And Buried Ruin is not a priority. So Cold Steel Heart. Next turn we can tablet or go for Quintorius if our opponent doesn't keep up counter spells. But yeah, I figured tablet resolves. Opponent can just sack their clue here. Probably should have waited to play my land in case I milled one, but I don't think we're gonna struggle to hit land drops. Clue is sacrificed. And the recruiter can go recruiting. What are we getting? Maybe Loran? Or a Skyclave Apparition, also quite flexible. Alright. I guess Skyclave can also exile my commander. So be it. We'll get some value on the way out. Alright, so goodbye Quintorius.
I'll never graduate.
Take 2. And then now we can try Ugin, which then still leaves up Source to Plowshares to protect it. Should probably play the land first now that Daze is in the format. So if they try to flicker the Skyclave, we could Swords it in response or just exile their commander to begin with. Okay, Vocalist warped into Loran. Ouch, yeah, so they had Loran in hand all along. So I could Swords the Vocalists so they do not get to trigger Loran twice. Do I care about losing my 2 artifacts? Not really. Does make it harder to play Quintorius, I suppose. Yeah, maybe I should just Swords. Although that does mean I'm out of answers for the opponent's commander, which is maybe more important. Yeah, sure, I'll just get a tap land. Can still protect Ugin. Okay, so Ugin going to keep on plussing, can play a 1-mana Monument, and then still want to keep up Swords.
The fabric of the multiverse obeys.
We'll just play a Selfless Spirits. Right, there's Dawn and Leo. Possible they can protect it for 1 mana. But we'll find out. Right, we both get to draw, so they're looking for maybe an Ephemerate, but they didn't find it. So now we get to have a fun turn with Quintorius, assuming there's no wash away. Free Bag of Holding is great too. So, gotta try and cast Quintorius, and then if it resolves, I may want to minus with Ugin here. And discard Loran. Exiled by the bag, make a Spirit. And Monument triggers, which can generate a treasure. Wouldn't help me get lost. Probably just draw. And now a currency converter as well. Alright, so opponent could recast Dawn and Leo. Probably want to destroy the Skyclave. then can maybe get more aggressive. And pass a turn. With Selfless Spirits, we can make our team indestructible and depopulate. Opponent's got Vocalist into maybe another Flicker effect. Yeah, momentary blink on Loran. That's too bad. So Monument and Bag are probably gone. Although Converter replaces the Bag in terms of enabling Quintorius, so that's fine. And then we can land another Planeswalker to double our tokens. Alright, so let's see here. I can activate Quintorius. I guess we'll wait on Elspeth and this turn just depopulate. I will convert, make a Spirit, play a free Signet. So yeah, if I go for Elspeth I can still get lost, but I think I just want to clear their creatures. So probably makes sense to sack the Spirit first. And then depopulate, which even draws a card since we control a multicolored creature. Can plus again, and keep up Get Lost. Alright, and then next turn we can give our spirits double strike, which includes the ones from Ugin. Alright, sweet, and that'll do it. So yeah, we got to see this red-white Quintorius Spirits deck in action. Plays out like a more controlling deck with a Planeswalker that you want to protect, but then once we get the engines going with artifacts that can exile stuff from graveyard especially, we can very quickly amass a lethal army of Spirit tokens and give those double strike to end the game. So yeah, overall a pretty unique playstyle for red-white, since usually red-white tends to get pigeonholed into kind of an aggressive deck. This one plays a little bit differently, but still has a very unique playstyle, so I'm a fan. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.